True crimers, welcome to Break the Case. I'm your host. I'm Jen Coffindaffer. Thank you so much for being here today. And I also wanted to I always kind of open the show that way, but I really wanted to give a sincere thanks for all of you who support the channel. Just really quick, thank you. I really appreciate each of you. We're growing slow, but glad to be growing. And we have two amazing guests today. We're going to be talking about the David case. David Burke is his real name. He spells his name really weird, D4VD. I thought it was interesting that his brother also spells his name odd. And we're going to talk about his brother a little bit today because I think he may have a role in this in some minor way. I'm not accusing him. I am just saying, even if it's just providing evidence or that interview that might be slowing the process down. But really quickly, the victim in this situation was Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Beautiful girl. She disappeared when she was only 13 years old back in January, actually, of 2024. Ran away, was brought back by police back to her house in March. There's a sighting of her, basically the last sighting in March before she's reported missing by her family. The whole family dynamic, none of us exactly know. I know the aunts come out and said some things, not getting into rumors here. We're going to focus in on what the evidence is against him. We have, again, two great guests. On September 8th was when Celeste ended up finally being found, if you will, but tragically in the front, that's the front trunk of a Tesla. Teslas are unique. They have trunks that are in the front, but I'm going to show you how teeny tiny they are. They're little. They're not what you might think of as a normal trunk. So she was found on the 8th of September. And we're going to break it down. I've got two great guests. I want to welcome to the show Dan of the Drunk Turkey Show. I always tell him, I love that name because it sticks with you, Drunk Turkey. Now, yes, does that really have much to do with law enforcement? Maybe not, but it's so cool. It's such a great name. People remember it. And Dan's a great guy. He provides so much common sense, former law enforcement back in Texas. And we just really want to welcome him to the show to bring some of his common sense to the stage. Hi, Dan.
How's it going? Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here.
Great to see you, Dan. Also want to invite to the show an amazing attorney. He was down in the trenches for decades, both on the defense side and on the prosecution side. The perfect person to bring to this discussion, and most discussions, quite frankly, if it has to do with law, Philip Dubé. He, again, was in LA. So he knows California law. He knows the ins and outs of Los Angeles. We're going to talk to him. I've got a lot of questions for him about this prosecution team, what may be going on behind the scenes. Philip, welcome to the stage.
Pleasure to be here. How is everybody?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to talk about this case. My hair's a hot mess because I just crawled out of my Tesla frunk, which really messed up my hair. I actually wanted to download the video that my poor husband, who would rather be shot than be anywhere near a camera. We only filmed his back view. And then I had my teenage son, who they're great videographers. When we were done with the whole thing, I looked over and he was just cracking up. Sure, it looked pretty odd. But suffice it to say, the reason we went through a reenactment today, have either of you seen it?
I don't believe so.
I don't think so.
I don't think I have. Yeah.
I wanted to put it up here on stage with us, but essentially from my phone to the computer, I couldn't get it to transfer. Yeah, I guess it's too big exiting out of my phone via email. But suffice it to say, my husband, I'm almost the exact height of Celeste Rivas. I'm 5'1.5". They said she was around 5'1", is what the medical examiner said. And first of all, my husband tried to stuff me into a gigantic, oversized leaf bag. It's the biggest they make, the most heavy duty. I was even trying to help him in bending my legs, although, as you all know, after 2 to 4 hours, you're going to have rigor mortis set in. It's going to be stiff, and it's not going to be easy to move joints. I was letting him move mine. And even doing that, I think I have a photo of just this photo. That's him, his butt there anyway. He has me sort of in this bag. This bag is so slippery, and he can deadlift well over 200 pounds. He could not lift me because I kept slipping with the bag. He couldn't even fit me really in the bag. My head's sort of sticking up there, and certainly had no chance whatsoever of fitting in the tiny frunk, which I'll show pictures of later. But I wanted to show everybody how difficult it is to manipulate dead weight, how difficult it is for one person, and I think this is something that I really believe that maybe more was one involved here, unless he dismembered and did all this on his own. You can't get it in that frunk. Guys, let me just get your initial impressions of this case. Let me start with you, Dan. What's your just initial impression?
It's a sad, sad situation for this young lady. She seems like she was failed at a lot of places. And, she goes missing several times. There's, you would assume that somebody may have noticed or should have noticed the pattern there to have gotten her help. She runs away a few times, and then unfortunately, we find out what happens to her. But yeah, all indications right away are this guy, David. Even myself, I have a strong suspicion that it, looks like it's him. But, like everybody else, I'm kind of just wondering, why hasn't law enforcement made a move yet? Why hasn't there been some sort of charges, if not for, the murder aspect of it, but for whatever inappropriate action he may have had with Celeste, whether it just be harboring a runaway, if not more. And so it's a very strange case. And it's one that I think, as of right now, I'm just kind of looking for answers, kind of like everybody else.
Thank you, Dan. All right, this is a perfect segue to Philip Dubé, because he's going to answer for us. So let's put the prosecution hat on you right now, Philip. You know the evidence so far. We know there's been a search warrant that's been served at his $20,000 a month house. We know that the vehicle was towed from that street. We know it was surreptitiously in a spot that wasn't as highly seen, but certainly seen. It was ticketed at least twice. It got towed, I believe, on the 20, or not towed on the 26th, but there was a ticket from the 26th of August. So we know it was there at least then, if not before. We know it got towed to the tow yard up to several days in advance of her being found on the 8th. My question to you is, we also have all this evidence showing them together. It doesn't seem to be any question from all the evidence we have that they had some sort of relationship. So my question to you, Philip, is why hasn't law enforcement just put a placeholder, as we call it, stepped in and either charged some sort of harboring charge or charged something worse to do with sexual conduct?
They don't have the evidence yet. That's the bottom line. What you really have right now is evidence of a death. You have evidence of a truant juvenile on the run from the family due to whatever trouble was going on in the home, maybe because of a love interest, and maybe because she had no interest in studying and graduating from school and hanging out with her peers. That's all you really have right now. And absent something linking David to the death itself, it is rank speculation to say that he actually did it. Now, granted, I'll give you, if this were a civil wrongful death trial, there is a load-bearing wall of evidence to say that he more than likely did this. But to say that it's proof beyond a reasonable doubt, I think is too risky to take him in. And frankly, I don't even think there's enough to bring him in on sex with a minor yet, because there is no evidence of him admitting that. And you don't have her coming into court to say that he did it. I think the only way around this is if they can show perhaps that maybe she was pregnant at the time of death, which they can do through hormonal testing. They'll look for a hormone called HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin. And it is also detectable post-mortem. Unfortunately, it does degrade over time, but nonetheless, it can be found within the body fluids. And if they can show that she was pregnant and they have any traces of the fetus where his DNA is in the fetus, then he's done, at least as to the sex charges. Now, as to whether or not he had a hand in the murder itself or the homicide itself, it remains to be seen. California has what's called the corpus delicti rule. And what it says is that a statement of a defendant cannot be offered against him at the preliminary hearing stage unless and until the prosecution proves every element of the underlying crime without the statement. So in a murder itself, obviously you would have to have the death, you would have to have the body, and you would probably need a coroner to say that it is a homicide. But if you don't have that finding from a coroner, but maybe you have him telling a friend or writing in a day planner or in a memoir or a diary, oh, you know, I snuffed her out, I couldn't take it anymore, I don't want a baby mama, whatever the statement might be, it would not come into evidence unless and until they establish a murder statement. So I think right now what they are really looking for is evidence to prove a murder without any statements from him. And I think it's just, slow. It's a process, and they need to take their time in working it up, because once they prosecute him, if he asserts his right to a speedy trial and they can't prove it, this young man really could walk on the homicide.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about, you talked about said something or wrote something, in a memoir. What we do have is some very interesting evidence based on his songs. He's written songs with the name Celeste. I understand it's circumstantial. All of this is going to be circumstantial. We all know circumstantial cases are quite often the strongest cases. But nevertheless, he also has this romantic homicide case that he wrote. Actually, I'm going to put a picture up later where he's, dragging a body and puts the body in the trunk and has a coffin on the stage. And this is him. This isn't some sort of AI mock-up here. Yeah. This is him with the blood in the hands. And a lot of people think that his songwriting, as often is with artists, that their art actually mimics life and reality. And when you go through this lyric, it's unbelievable. Dan, what are your thoughts on some of the lyrics you've read pertaining to the songs he's written?
I went through one of the songs that he wrote, the Celeste song, and to me, it's almost like he's, and I had Dr. Vona, who is a doctor in psychology, and we were going through the lyrics of the song, and she had kind of told me that in many cases of his videos, he's playing the roles of both people. Sometimes he's the victim and the assaultee or assaulter in his music videos. And when I was reading his songs, it kind of comes out that way as well, especially the Celeste song, where he starts off saying, something about not needing weed to get high. And then, I love it when you hold me, when you cry, or something of that nature. And it was almost, as you go through it, it's almost like a back and forth. Will you be my Valentine? And then he says something to the effect, I want to make Cupid suicidal. And so to me, yeah, it strongly suggests, life imitating art. Is this something that he had in his mind? Is this something that was, because it's a constant thing in his, I guess, in his music, this affection and abuse of some sort, or murder. And so, yeah, I strongly suspect that a lot of what he writes, that's his mind. That's what it's his inner thoughts. It's an expression of who he is. And, it's to me, it's kind of coming out as a possibility. I mean, I can't say for a fact at this point, but it does seem like a very high possibility of life imitating art.
And Philip, I'm going to get to you on this, but I want to add to that. This is a very macabre individual. This is an individual that certainly has broken down on stage twice. I've personally watched the videos where he's singing, and he seems to be so upset. In one instance, he couldn't even finish the song. He's extremely emotional in his interviews, and I'm just talking about this whole underlying current of murder, sadness, loss that he seems to portray. And that's where I want to pitch it back to you, Philip. What do you think in terms of, and have you ever had a case where lyrics from an accused was used in any semblance of evidence or some sort of writing?
I've had poetry written by a client come into evidence once at a murder trial. It was a very sad case. I represented a man. He was one of the Marielitos who was sent from Cuba in the early 80s when Castro opened up all the prisons and the mental hospitals because they were siphoning the coffers, if you will, for purposes of supporting them for the rest of their lives. So basically what he did is he released them all, and they went on boats out of the Mariel Harbor to the United States. And I think the first landing was in Florida. But nonetheless, he was one of the original Marielitos, and some people deem that to be a little derogative, but it comes from the Mariel Harbor, where they actually entered this sort of fleet of boats to come to America. But nonetheless, he constantly would write poems about mayhem and murder, life in Cuba, and the prosecution, and of course he was charged with murder, tried to get this sort of litany of poetry into evidence. And fortunately, I got the court to exclude it all. But what I think is going to happen here is back in 2023, the California legislature passed a statute in our evidence code. It's 352.2. And what it does is it excludes artistic expression, such as song lyrics, poetry, stories, whatever, passages from books that an author may have written from evidence in a criminal case if it has this effect of unduly prejudicing the defendant. And so the court has to engage in a balancing act, if you will, a balancing test, and decide if this aspect of freedom of expression is outweighed by the prejudicial effect that it could have on a jury in deciding guilt. And I could see a judge excluding this for a host of reasons. Number one, the court doesn't want to be reversed on appeal, because ultimately, if you think about it, the evidence would come in as character evidence. It would be one thing if she were depicted in these images and her name was mentioned, but just some artistic, creative expression in the abstract or in a vacuum about death and blood and mayhem and a body going into a trunk or a frunk, I think is unduly prejudicial. And I think a judge is more apt to exclude it. I do.
Well, and you're proof in the pudding. You got something similar to this excluded.
Yeah.
Of course, on the other side, I mean, put on your prosecutor hat here. Come on, you're dragging a body, you're going to a trunk, you've got bloody handprints, you've got a song written about Celeste. Celeste's dead, Celeste is in a frunk. You're describing all these feelings of sort of love combined with loss and, possible culpability. Tell me about your prosecutor's hat. You don't think there's a prosecution that you could put on the table that could have this come in?
Absolutely. Remember, the fear is that it will be used as character evidence. In other words, to show that the defendant has a propensity to kill. So if I were putting on my line prosecutor hat for a day, the argument would be is that it's being offered to prove something other than character, such as intent, motive, modus operandi, MO. That kind of stuff. And if you could somehow show that non-character purpose and non-hearsay purpose, a judge could let it in. Because let's face it, all evidence offered against a defendant in a criminal trial is prejudicial. All of it. I mean, that's why the prosecution wants it in. The question is it more prejudicial than probative? In other words, is it so upsetting? Would it be so upsetting to a jury to hear this evidence that they lose sight of why they even need to hear it and just convict on the inflammatory nature of these portrayals and these depictions in these images. If that's the case, then the court can exclude it. If not, then you have to deal with it. And you cross-examine whoever is presenting it. And you, through Q&A, through direct and through cross, you just try to explain it away and show, well, this is who he is as an artist. It doesn't necessarily mean that this is who he is in life. And if this is his style of crooning and ballads and R&B, we don't convict people for who they are as artists. We only convict people for who they are as homicidal criminals. And don't let the prosecution fool you by trying to introduce this stuff to convict. But if I were the prosecutor, I would say, look, it's just a little too coincidental that right around the time this young lady goes missing, that he is showing through some form of truth serum in art that he may have had a hand in this. And you can decide, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, how much weight, if any, you want to put on this, but make no mistake about it. He is telling you through this that he has a guilty conscience. And this is evidence of consciousness of guilt. So I ask that you return a verdict of guilty. That's how you do it.
I like that. I've always said if I ever got in trouble, I need you. Actually, and I gotta have. There's a couple others that I really like too. But I gotta have you. Dan, talk to me about any other lyric that you found interesting, that you think, as somebody investigating this, that you'd be looking at.
Well, I mean, just the title of the song Celeste, that kind of ties in the possibility of some sort of relationship.
Yeah.
The rest of it is, unless he wrote a song after the murders and there's something that kind of coincides with something there, or he made a music video after the murder and there's something in there that's kind of very resemblant to what had occurred. I think it's kind of difficult to utilize that, but the name, I think you can utilize the name of the song, what it's the meaning behind the song. It's a love song. It was written, I believe, around December, never released. In the middle of it says "Be My Valentine," so it sounds like it's a dedication song to somebody, and you might be able to utilize that as far as some sort of what do you call it, a connection, so to speak, between David and the victim. And so the rest of the stuff, I mean, it's gory. Some of it is just kind of like obsessive, and you might be able to throw that out because he's even saying it himself that he's obsessed with her and things of that nature. And so the words of the songs aren't as gory outside of the first one, Romantic Homicide, which that one was written, I believe, before he met her. So I'm not sure how much they can utilize that either.
When was that written, though? I thought it was 2023. Am I wrong?
I thought it was 2022, but it may have been 2023.
Yeah, and it's a little up in the air. For those in the audience who don't know, it's believed that they actually met online through gaming. And it's very unclear whether she was, I've seen reports clear back to 11 years old, 12 years old, 13 years old. So it's pretty unclear. What we do know that's pretty clear, and Dan, I want to ask you about this too, is I think one key piece of evidence is the school teacher, the 7th grade science teacher that talks about how she was in the class. I've looked, I have not seen it debunked, and that he came into the class and he provides great information. He has pictures of her, pictures of David picking her up in the classroom. So I think that that's a really strong piece of evidence for our timeline. Did you take it the same way?
I do. I think that if there's anybody that can connect them two together, then that would be just more evidence that he has some sort of involvement. I mean, in the end of the day, her body was found in his vehicle just around the corner from his apartment where he was staying. Now, that concerns me a little bit that there hasn't been an arrest, because kind of the things that you mentioned before about the location of where the body was found and the vehicle was found in his vehicle. This is something that sounds like, if it is David, that it was one, inexperienced, two, in the moment. It sounds like something that was a heat of the moment, out of passion type of situation, possibly. And, he put a body in a vehicle that has a lot of technology. I'm kind of dumbfounded that they weren't able to at least maybe get a warrant for David's phone locations and stuff like that, and see if they can connect him with the locations from the Tesla. So to me, the fact that they haven't made an arrest yet, given how many issues that you have there close to the house, his vehicle, with a vehicle with a lot of technology, I'm a little bit concerned that there's something that's hooking this up, or there's a hiccup here.
Well, and I want to talk to you about this, Philip, because, and I'm going to do actually a separate post on this on Twitter, but I took all these pictures of my screen. So people might not know if you don't have a Tesla. The Tesla's book, the instruction book manual, is actually in a computer in the vehicle. So for those of you who haven't been one, there's a TV screen that's very large. And in that is your book, is your manual. So I went in with a lot of help from my teenager, because he knows this thing inside and out. And we pulled up the manual, and I had always known, I took a picture of this too, I can turn off the security. I can have the security alert my phone. There's up to 9 cameras, depending on the Tesla, the Y model. And you can disable these cameras, everyone. I can do it in one flick of a button. And I have this whole thing that I'm going to put up on Twitter. But my point is, was he sophisticated enough, or was this pre-planned? Was this a crime of passion? And he was still smart enough, because remember, he didn't dismember her likely in that vehicle. I mean, this would take saws, this would take knives, a machete. I mean, I've seen people dismembered all sorts of ways, but there's going to be tool marks to show that, assuming this happened. I think it happened now. But my point is, and the question I want to ask you, Philip, is, does California have any crime of passion laws? Because I know some states do.
Oh, of course. We have the voluntary manslaughter law, which is a downgrade from murder to manslaughter, where you've killed either after quarrel or in the heat of passion. The sudden quarrel is typically the bar fight. You throw a punch, they fall, they hit their head, and they're dead. And if the jury finds that there was a loss of human emotion because of this type of bar brawl, the jury can find that there was no intent to kill and come back on the manslaughter. And the legal advantage to that, I believe it only carries 11 years. So it's not a life sentence. The other common scenario where we see manslaughter is where you catch your significant other in bed with another person, and you just kind of lose your cool, just lose it, if you will, and you start shooting or killing or strangling, and that can form the basis of the voluntary manslaughter. And again, the advantage is it does not carry life in prison. So we call it out here heat of passion or sudden quarrel. So the real test, though, is, was the killing committed during the heat of the moment? Or did you have ample time to cool off, get your thoughts together, and go back and get the job done, almost out of anger and maybe out of vengeance or retaliation? If that's the case, that is murder, my friends. That is no longer manslaughter, unfortunately.
So in this case, we just don't obviously have the evidence to even know who did it. And one of the points that's really been bothering me is his concert schedule. I posted his concert schedule. Great team behind me getting a lot of this evidence together. Mm-hmm. That concert schedule is insane. It's almost all out of state. I'm talking about in August, July. I mean, he wasn't even around. Mm-hmm. So I think that is a big deal. As an investigator, I'm looking at this going, oh my gosh, now I got to pull every single one of his flight tickets. I have to pull what vehicle he was taken in. When's the last time he drove this Tesla? Obviously, he wasn't driving the Tesla when he's out touring all over the country. Mm-hmm. And so I think this is a big point of problem for the prosecution. And listen to this. Where's Celeste during all this time? I have about 3 pictures, not counting the one TMZ initially showed that they retracted, and I said that wasn't her. They identified who that was. I'm talking about other pictures where one where she's, I believe, backstage. There's another where he kind of ushers her. My point is if he's not with her all the time, which I don't believe he was, maybe she was, but we're not seeing the footage of it. I just believe we would see all this footage. If he wasn't with her, who was staying with her in that house? Who had the use of that Tesla? The information that I have from multiple witnesses is that, and I'm getting a lot of this through a reporter who interviewed these individuals, is that she was, or a lot of people use the Tesla. A lot of people use the Tesla. You know, you don't even need a key to use a Tesla, by the way. And so, and then also to get in and out of the house and so on. It was a huge party house. That is undeniable. There are all these instances where security minimally was called to the house before, during, and after likely her murder. So my question to you, Dan, really quick is, have you thought about this issue and that maybe others were involved, or maybe somebody else completely different was involved? How does this evidence affect your mind there?
I kind of almost have to believe that somebody else at least had to have helped, if not somebody else had to have done it. Kind of like what you were saying earlier with, you know, you can turn off your camera, you can turn off this and that. Well, there's a history of that. And if he's turning that off around the time when the vehicle was last moved, that should at least lead you to some warrants. And like I said, this, you know, if he did this, parking it next to his place and his car, you know, it doesn't scream planned out. It screams somebody who something happened very quickly and didn't think about their actions and just kind of left the vehicle close and left her there. Now, that's what concerns me, is that there isn't that action. Now, maybe perhaps if there is multiple users behind, you know, who used the vehicle, well, I mean, then I think it's possible. Maybe that's the reason why there hasn't been an arrest, is, you know, if he was traveling around a lot and he can prove that he was somewhere else during that time, maybe that's why there hasn't been an arrest. I think that's going to be the biggest hurdle at this point, is can they point down a time of when she passed? Because from what I understand, the body was heavily decomposed. You know, can they determine how long it had been, and can they pinpoint him being in Los Angeles at that time? And I think maybe that's the biggest hurdle that they have right now. But with the evidence that they have, the vehicle and the information, I'm fiberglass. I mean, I'm just lost for words that if they do have him and the possibilities of evidence that they should have at this point, why they haven't made an arrest.
Right. The triangulation just of her cell phone information, his cell phone information, exactly. Tesla, it gives you great pause as to why nothing's been done right now. I totally agree with you, Philip, that they feel like they just aren't there yet. I really think there might be other people involved, and that's why it's taking longer, because they want to get the whole caboodle. But this is my question for you, Philip. Here you are. It's becoming a high-profile case, although I have to say, I don't know about you, Dan. I first reported on it literally the day after a body was found, on the 9th, and nobody cared. Everybody on my Twitter was like, who cares? Another, you know, dead body in a wrapper car. And I said, well, I care, because typically that's probably somebody missing, and, you know, somebody who people have been looking for, and now she's turned up. It was only after it ended up being Celeste, which was the known girlfriend, that, you know, it kind of started exploding. But I've seen it on mainstream media really die out, except for maybe on News Nation. But this is my question for you, Philip. Here you are. I need you to put your prosecutor hat back on. And you've got a case that you know is starting to blow up, could blow up in the media, a dismembered body of at least somebody that's well known enough to, I'd never heard of him, but well known enough to have a concert tour in Europe. What is it like behind the scenes in that prosecutor office? What are the discussions like? Get this thing solved. Are you feeling pressure?
Well, first of all, I'm not even convinced that the case has even been presented to the district attorney's office yet. Remember, they're not going to present anything until they're ready to go to an arrest warrant, or if they actually have him in custody and bring him to court for arraignment. Unless and until you're at that point, the DA's office is not even involved. The only time they might be involved is if they don't feel they have enough to file directly, but instead they want to give it to the grand jury. So if they put it in the hands of a grand jury, which is basically the functional equivalent of a preliminary hearing, and the jury returns a true bill of indictment, then they can go and arrest him, unseal the indictment, and you arraign him on the indictment. But for now, I truly don't think the DA's office is even involved. And the reason why is they just do not have enough evidence yet for a filing deputy to say, we can prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, it's not to say that there haven't been sort of occasional discussions with a filing deputy in the DA's office. But before they even do that, they have to establish where the killing occurred, not where the body was found, but where the killing actually occurred. And if they can't even determine that the killing itself was in LA County, then the LA County DA's office is not even the proper venue for bringing charges. Do you know what I'm saying? Now, on the other hand, coroners typically, when they find a cause and manner of death, will deem the situs of death to be the location where the body was ultimately discovered. But I think for now, I think the conversations and the discussions with the DA are minimal, if any.
Okay, I've got a question for you. And again, FBI person here, FBI hat. I tell you, whenever I had any sort of case like this, I am right in the prosecutor's office. That was just me. Typically with, as we talked about before, my line prosecutor, just stoking it, letting them know this is what I'm working on. This is what I've got. But my question for you is, we know there's been a search warrant. So there was a probable cause affidavit in LA, and this might be different in the FBI. In the FBI, yes, I can do this all on my own, so to speak, but I don't. I write it up. I go to the prosecutor's office and I just say to my line prosecutor, hey, we're going to go after a search warrant for his house. We're going for a search warrant for the Tesla, for all the devices. We're going to be searching who knows else, what else they're searching. Right. I want to keep them up to speed so they're not trying to just catch up like a duck on a pond, the feet underneath the water. Is that not how it works in LA?
Very seldom. And the reason why is prosecutors do not ever want to become what we call the affiant. In other words, the declarant, the person preparing or help prepare the affidavit for the warrant. Otherwise, they become a witness. If they're help authoring the underlying affidavit, they're becoming a witness to that. And if they're functioning as a witness, they're actually going to lose their prosecutorial immunity. So let's say, for argument's sake, it turns out that the warrant is issued, the search turns up nothing, but you've ransacked the man's home, his business, his filing cabinet, seized his computers. He can file a civil rights lawsuit and actually name the DA's office. They will lose their absolute immunity from liability if they were functioning as witnesses in an affidavit or in a declaration for a warrant. So they have to be very, very careful. It's one thing for something to be a teachable moment to help cops, structure a warrant. But once you start getting into the weeds and the facts of what you need to prosecute, it's a very, very dangerous, slippery slope. And most prosecutors aren't going to do that, at least the ones that I've worked with over the years.
Okay, so hopefully I couched this correctly. I write it. I'm going to let them know we are serving a search warrant at their house. And, and then the only other discussions are with the judge, right? Because he might have some questions about my affidavit. But
Correct.
my point is, I keep the prosecutor up to speed on where we're at in the investigation. I see your point as a witness, and I hope I was clear. but definitely going to keep them in the process. It sounds like it doesn't work that way in LA. So you feel like at this point, it's strictly the homicide unit. And by the way, this was declared a homicide a few days ago.
Yeah.
It's a homicide. It's not a suicide. It's not an accidental death. And so I wanted to make that clear too.
And by the way, they have seasoned homicide detectives in the Bureau, in their precinct there where the investigation is pending, who can help the line detectives prepare all that stuff. They don't need to go to attorneys. They don't need to go to prosecutors, because ultimately it is the cops who prepare their affidavits for warrants, and it's the courts that issue the warrants. Prosecutors are actually out of it. They only get involved once the evidence is seized and an arrest is made and they're asked to file charges. It's extraordinarily rare for prosecutors to be taken to the scene pre-filing to decide how to craft and draft a warrant, what they need to say in there with particularity to make sure a judge signs off on it. It's up to the cops to get it right. And if a judge finds that there's no probable cause, then you know what? You go back and you redo your warrant. That's how you do it. And if you can never reach a point where you've got enough evidence in your affidavit, then you got to let it go and let it go cold until you get more evidence. But you don't go to the DA's office and say, help me get more evidence. They're going to say, no, you need to go back out there and beat the bushes, go out on patrol and find more evidence. That is not our job. We are officers of the court, and you are officers who serve and protect out on the beat. So it's different roles in the justice system.
Totally get that. Not denying anything you said, just merely saying that whenever you have a case, at least in the Bureau, especially a long-term case like this, in other words, that it's taking weeks, I'm going to be in that office letting him know where I'm at on the case. That's just how we rolled as FBI agents with our United States attorneys. Sounds like it's very much different. And I think part of it might be caseload for you all. I can't imagine the caseloads of a prosecutor, a DA, assistant DA in Los Angeles.
By the way, my gut tells me, just my spidey sense, that they are waiting on the opinion from a forensic entomologist. And the premier one in the United States is, I think he's in Indiana. His name is Dr. Neil Haskell. And I've used him. I'm not sure if he's retired or if he's still taking cases, or maybe he's teaching. But nonetheless, what he does is he looks at all the insect activity that formed on the body. And he can tell by the larva development, the insect development, and the cycle of life of any insects collected from the human remains, how long that body has been decomposing, and almost down to the day when she died. That's exactly what they can do. And it's based purely on forensic insect activity. And I would not be a bit surprised if they have sent samples to either him or another colleague of his within the forensic entomology world out there to see if they can pinpoint down to a very specific date when she died. And once they have that, they're going to see if David's precious alibi will hold water. If it doesn't, I'm telling you now, they're going to bring that kid in leg irons.
I love this point, and I'm so glad you talked about it. So glad you brought it up, because it's such a huge part of a case like this.
Yes.
Forensic anthropologists and forensic bug people.
Yeah.
Semeniologists.
Yeah.
Both are going to work together. Dan, I'm going to bring it back to you and ask you about this whole Hello Kitty aspect. And I have actually another picture of Celeste when she was just little, like, I don't know, she looks 5 years old with her Hello Kitty. We know from her family that she loved Hello Kitty. I have probably a half a dozen pictures of David with Hello Kitty everything. How do you think this could play in? And would you even care about this as an investigator, or would you say, yep, another link?
Well, the one thing that really stands out to me is the scratches on his face. When was that picture taken?
Oh, I would have to get the date.
because he's got some scratches on his face. If that was taken after or here recently, then I mean that's probably the most compelling thing that I look at when I look at this. But when it comes to the Hello Kitty, I believe that was something that Celeste was, familiar with. That's something that she enjoyed. She liked. She had Hello Kitty stuff, and to me, I think more so the tattoo, the shush tattoo, alongside with it. I would try. Well, my thoughts go to, I don't know if you could utilize this in court or not, but I would say, hey, they had a secret relationship. You can tell by the shush on the finger that you would put to your mouth to say that you have a secret, so to speak. And so, how would he show his affection to her publicly without publicly putting out, her out there? And one way, in my opinion, would be through the form of, here's to you. You're your favorite Hello Kitty, a somewhat of a secret message to each other, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what I feel is what's happening. Can you prove that? I don't know. I mean, you'd have to go through his messages, get warrant for his historical data and stuff like that, and see if there was ever any type of text messages between the two saying, hey, did you see what I put out there for you? Did you see the Hello Kitty? I sent you this. If there's like a connection between gifts or comments about Hello Kitty, then I think it's definitely something that you can utilize. But I think that's kind of where I stand there. But I'm interested about those scratches on his face.
I'll get you that date. I just need to go back and look at the photo where
Okay.
I pulled that from, because I pulled way too many. And
By the way, don't you find it a little creepy that there's this kid with Hello Kitty type toys? I mean, when you think about it,
you mean not a kid,
know,
you and me, but yeah.
First of all, how many adolescents are into Hello Kitty and Barbie and, the Ken doll and all? You kind of outgrow that at some point, and I would think at this point in her life, she has maybe moved on to bigger and better things. I associate Hello Kitty with kids in grammar school and maybe middle school. It's really terrible. I would think that once you're in adolescence or post-adolescence, you're into sort of, more adult type activity, not to say it has to be Kama Sutra or aphrodisiacs or anything like that, but certainly something that older teens are more drawn to, than Hello Kitty. It's kind of cringy and discomforting, don't you think?
I'm glad you mentioned it, but do you think it speaks toward his possible affinity to little ones? Like, could this be part of grooming? You remember, I told you, at least if we believe what we found online at some of these Reddit posts and so on, I mean, they meant gaming. I think it was Fortnite, if I recall correctly, years ago. I mean, when I say years, we're in 2025. I think it was 2022, 2023. Dan, if you know something different, let me know. And again, we can't 100% confirm it, right? We can't.
Yeah.
Because we're not law enforcement, but we can say, well, it's out there. I'm going to bring up a couple more Hello Kitty pictures. But Philip, can you tell us, I mean, is this something you ever saw with your pedophiles, them focusing in on particular, cutesy things like this?
Well, the pedophile clients that I've had over the years, many of them, not all of them, are more opportunistic within the family. Typically you would see the Hello Kitty stuff in the more predatory type molestations, where you have the guy sitting in his car, in his van, at a school bus stop or next to a park, maybe even next to a school, waiting for the bell to ring and kids to come out. And they use these types of childlike toys to draw kids to the car, and maybe have a bag of candy, something that would just draw children. And that's how you kind of lure them into the van or the car, and you drive off and you have your way with them. But otherwise, I don't know what he is doing with this Hello Kitty stuff, unless he's just showing what his girl has in her possession and the type of stuff that she has amassed and collected and that she's into. But I sincerely doubt that David is into Hello Kitty himself. I mean, first of all, it's a young girls type attraction. It's certainly not a young boys. And if anything, I don't know what it proves, frankly. I don't. It's a little confounding.
What about you, Dan? Anything in your law enforcement background where you saw any sort of predator, or in any of these cases that you've been investigating, where they use something like this in this weird way? I mean, in other words, somebody who is having a relationship with a minor.
Right. So, I mean, I think this is an example of modern grooming. So, like, kind of like what's going on with, Charlie Kirk and that situation out there with Tyler Robinson, where they utilize like furries and animation and stuff to kind of get you in. This guy is posting these things online, posting Hello. Probably, I mean, I don't know. I've never followed him before, but I'm assuming that those pictures of Hello Kitty are attracting other folks that with like Google Pixel that utilize or look for Hello Kitty and stuff. So you're probably getting this type of pictures and attention out to those younger children. So it's broadening his reach to younger girls, in my opinion. It's a way of like, all right, well, if I want to attract a certain type of person, a certain age group, I'm going to post myself with this. And because of the Google Pixels, these girls that are searching Hello Kitty or looking at Hello Kitty pictures, well, because of the algorithm and things, now my picture is going to populate, and you're going to get a much easier way of reaching these young kids. Now, when they met, it was sometime in 2022. I guess when they can say that there was something like concrete was October of 2022. When there was an exchange on Discord, but they could have met before that, obviously. And the Romantic Homicide song was released in July of 2022. I don't know when the video was released, but it sounds like the video may have been released after they met.
I'll tell you what I'd like to know is whether or not he's had girlfriends his own age, or maybe even older. Has he ever even dated somebody in their late teens, early 20s, maybe even 30s, where, he's going after the sugar mama and he's the sugar baby kind of thing? But otherwise, who knows? This could be the behavior of a sort of a infantilized type young adult himself. And maybe he is sexually attracted to children. I don't know.
Well,
but this is weird behavior.
A couple of things on this, Philip, that I don't know if you know, but with him, he was homeschooled. So I believe at the age of about 14, so 8th grade, my understanding is there were issues. Mm-hmm. And he was pulled. And Dan, I can't wait to get if your information mimics mine, pulled out of school and homeschooled because of issues. Mm-hmm. Now, we don't really know what those issues are, but if you look at the macabreness, if you look at this bizarre, and I have so many more pictures of stuff like this, of this Hello Kitty thing for a 20-year-old, as you mentioned, is it grooming? Is it the modern grooming? Is it all the reach he's going to get from this? And to answer your question, Philip, I say the proof is in the pudding. If indeed he had a relationship with a 13-year-old, she would have been 13 in 2023. I'm sorry, 24 when she disappeared. In 24, September 7th, turned 14. I mean, these are people that are kids. Mm-hmm. They really are. I'm not going to say prepubescent because I've seen photos of her and she looked like she'd gone through puberty. But yeah, man, young. So if you're attracted to that, you're attracted to that. What do you say, Dan?
There's some disturbing signs there that this guy is attracted to some young kids. And, the only thing that I know as far as why he was homeschooled was because of some sort of attention situation, that he had some problems paying attention in class. What have you heard that's a little bit more than that? Because I'm kind of interested in that.
Well, so have you looked at anything from the brother?
The only thing that I've seen from the brother was that he was actually, I believe, photographed in a next to Celeste at backstage at one of his David's performances. That's the only thing I've seen about the brother. What's going on with him?
Well, I'm like you, Dan, and you, Philip. I never like to just throw things out, but I always say we're a true crime family. We're a true crime community. We discuss leads that sometimes go in the right direction and sometimes, they pivot. Like for an example, there was a huge story for a long time that she was pregnant and that a baby was found near the thing. I mean, I ran that to ground, came out and said, this is baloney. I see no evidence of that. And that was my stance on the whole pregnancy issue. Although to Philip's point, could she have been pregnant? They're going to figure that out.
Oh, yeah.
But when she was first found on the 8th of September, and they had no idea who she was. Law enforcement didn't know. They asked for the public's help, as everyone remembers, and they gave all this information, which quite frankly is where we got a lot of this information very early on if we go backwards. In that situation, I think they would have said a pregnant girl if they knew. In other words, if the fetus wasn't so deteriorated that they didn't know, or they didn't have the HCG test done yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I think because they didn't say that, I don't think she's going to be, I don't think she was in the past. I don't think she is now, but we don't know conclusively until the autopsy comes out. But back to your question about the brother, I'm starting a deep dive into him because he has some social media posts and things. And I'm just wondering, I mean, when you look at cases historically, and Philip, I'd love you to talk about this, but cases historically, when somebody does this, other than if it's in the heat of passion and it's just the two that are there, but the cleanup, aftermath, the hiding, the cover up, especially when you have a body like this and somebody who isn't a career criminal, you're going to need some help. So I've been thinking, who do people call on? And they typically call on their most loved, most close associates, family, parents, and so forth. So I'm not making any accusation. I'm just saying I am headed down this path, and I'm going to empty it, right? I'm going to figure it out or not, or come back with an opinion, which I don't have a full opinion now. But I think it needs to be looked into, and I think there's a lot of social media out there. And so, Dan, I hope maybe we can work on this together. But Philip, what's your take on the cases you've had where oftentimes the accomplices end up being family or friends rather than, somebody close?
Well, typically, in the inner city homicide type cases, they're usually gang related when they're like this. Not always, but usually. And it's extremely rare to be interfamilial, like the Adelsons, if you will, in the Dan Markel type situation where the whole family is in on snuffing this guy out as, hand for one, hand for all type situation. But what I truly believe we have here is that this is sort of a lone wolf scoundrel who, where the walls were closing in because of a relationship with an underage girl. I don't know if she was pregnant. We'll soon find that out. But she was more than just a clingy, needy, sort of groupie fan. And she wanted more. He did not. Maybe he felt just a little too tied down by having her around. And maybe he was afraid that she was going to blow the whistle on a relationship. And if that's the case, then I think he would have done this completely on his own. I don't think he would have involved other people. And I'll tell you why. Had he have done that, the word would have already gotten out. His Confederates would have already blabbed. It would have been somewhere. It would have been in a cryptic social media post. They would have told a friend or an acquaintance. That acquaintance would have run with it. And before you know it, the police have it. And it's very possible that that is what happened. And someone has gone to the police and the police is just not releasing it. We won't know until there's either an indictment or a preliminary hearing. But my gut says for now that he did this alone, if at all.
And what do you think, Dan, in your experience?
So I'm curious about the brother as well. I don't know much about him or anything like that. I know there was a photo that was taken and they were pretty him and Celeste were apparently, if that was Celeste, it seems like it's a photo that's from a distance. We're fairly close. Maybe perhaps I think that if I don't know, I think that if maybe perhaps if he had done something, not saying he did, just kind of spitballing, I could see how David could withhold information, from not getting his brother in trouble. But I'm kind of going there because the fact that they don't have any evidence there for him. Now, I'm not saying that this is the case. Let me just preference this. I probably want to take it back because I don't want people looking at this guy as he did something and there's absolutely possibly no evidence of it. But I wonder if he was even in Los Angeles at the time, and if he was, I would look at it because like I said, there's a hiccup here somewhere, and there's a lot of technology. There's a lot of warrants that can be pulled. And if somebody moved the vehicle for David while he was out of the area, then hey, there's that could be what the hiccup is. It's like, hey, that vehicle was last moved on this date and time, and he was at this place. That would make sense that somebody would have moved the vehicle. To me, I think that if somebody did that, it probably have to be somebody fairly close to him, if it happened at all. I just, like I said, I'm still stuck on the fact that there's so much technology here and warrants that could be utilized. There's probably cameras, maybe not even on the Tesla, but in the neighborhood that could be, gathered and things of that nature. I just find it so weird that they've not done more.
Plus,
but
don't you think there would have been an alert that he would have gotten some type of a notification, maybe by phone or email, that his car is being driven or that his car is being moved or left somewhere? You get alerts when you have a Tesla. I mean, I just sold one, so I happen to know how it works. Anytime somebody unlocks the car, whenever I plug it in for it to get charged, my phone lights up. So you would think that if you have a car thief or some intruder going into the car without your consent is doing something, you'd be calling a friend and say, hey, can you check on my car? It should be in the garage or it should be parked out front. But the fact that he did nothing, I think, is circumstantial evidence of consciousness of guilt. That's just my take.
Exactly. And I'm going to take it one step further and say this. Listen, you're out, you're touring or whatever, you come back and you're like, where the hell's my car? And where the hell's my Celeste?
Right.
So, like, hello, are you going to report your Tesla missing? My understanding now, after seeing a new receipt, it was an X, not a Y, but still the trunk space is about the same. But now you're talking $100,000 car. It was in 2023, an X. But as you know, if you've had a Tesla as well, you can disable all that.
Yeah.
I can make anything go off. But my whole thing is, I mean, what do you think about that, Dan? You're out, you're touring or whatever. You come back to your house and you're like, where the hell's my Tesla? And my girl? Like, isn't it just like an obvious thing? And then how do you he was literally in a concert when her body was found. I think it was the day after he had a concert, I believe. I mean, he's out touring literally this whole time she's gone. Not a peep.
You see, that's why, to me, that if he's aware of it and if he knows that this has happened and it's not him, then he knows who did it. And it's somebody that he allowed to have the vehicle. And it's probably somebody close enough to him that he wouldn't rat out, even though it was his girlfriend who lost his life. Yeah. And so that's kind of one of the things where I'm looking at, like, all right, there's a photo of the brother out at the Raptors. Could he in the Raptors at the back of a concert, and it was his performance? Could he have developed feelings? Something happened. He calls his brother, says, hey, I don't know what to do. This happened. Maybe even minimizes the situation and say something else happened and it was an accident or whatever the case may be. But to me, there would have to be some sort of knowledge there if it went down that way. But it sounds like, because there's not an arrest, there's either something like that where he knows who committed the crime and he's helping in a certain situation because it's his car. He should have access. He should know who has access and things of that nature. Or somebody's helping him that he trusts that was able to either move the car or do something to it. that kind of makes things pause a little bit when it comes to his arrest, because like I mentioned, the digital footprint behind here is just so massive, and where it was at is, there's got to be something big here that is hooking up, that's hooking this up.
I agree. Do you agree, Philip? And I know what you're saying is that a prosecutor wouldn't necessarily, or wouldn't in LA, be involved at this stage, but they got to be knowing this is going on, unless they're living underneath a rock in LA, that somebody's going to get this ticket, right? We call it getting the ticket, that you're going to be the one getting the case. And I mean, I just think as an investigator, there's a hiccup either involving, because there's more than one person involved, which again, if you are not a career criminal or a gangbanger, which David wasn't, I mean, I don't have any evidence that he was out gang banging with a gang. He was touring. He was too busy. And so how is he even going to know how to dismember a body? I mean, really, I mean, how do you even get the body where you want it to go? Dead weight is so heavy, which I showed in that video that I made. It just seems to me that we're looking at more than one person being involved in this. That's what, from the evidence, what I'm seeing. Philip?
Well, look, unless you're dismembering with surgical precision, it's not that hard to do. You can take a bow saw, you cut them up, and you put them in a hefty bag. What's so hard about that? It's primitive, it's medieval, but in theory, you don't need a cadre of people to help you do it.
So you don't think he'd be panicked and be saying, remember, this is a kid that's pretty coddled, from what I understand. He grew up in a good household, from what I understand. He was homeschooled, he was taken care of, he was living the life. I mean, he wasn't signing his own lease. His manager, who I want to pull up here, because I think he is going to play a major role in this. I'm not saying a major role in the murder, and I'm also not saying that about the brother. I'm saying a major role as a witness, and possibly witness to things and where people were. But this is a coddled guy, Philip. This is a guy that people are doing his stuff. He's rich.
I think the cops are waiting for more substantial concrete evidence that David had a hand in it. And there's a legal reason why. And we talked about some of them before. A few years ago, California repealed the felony murder rule regarding accomplices to an underlying homicide, meaning if somebody is killed during the commission of a felony, the accomplice liability is limited to the actual killer, or to one who intended to kill, or to one who ended a life with reckless disregard for human life. And unless you have those aspects, you can't even file a felony murder charge against an assumed accomplice. You just can't even do it. So I think the problem is the DA's office just does not have enough evidence to bring him in as the actual killer or as an aider and abettor accomplice to the murder. They just don't have it. If all you have is a body present in his property, namely a frunk, that does not prove complicity to the underlying murder. If anything, it just proves constructive possession of the human remains. That's not enough. You need the malice aforethought, and you need what's called the actus reus, the criminal act of ending the life. If you don't have it, the DA is not going to file.
Right. Really quickly, because there's some new people that joined chat and some questions, I want to make this very clear. On the dismemberment, back before, no. Actually, it was, I think it's called KTLA. And they were the first to report that the body was dismembered. I've posted this a couple of times on my Twitter. I should have it here as well, but it specifically says she was dismembered. Today, with a Tesla and the fact that I'm the exact same size of, pretty much the exact same size, give or take maybe a pound or two or half an inch, the same size as Celeste. The frunk is not a trunk. It is teeny. Oh gosh, I took that picture down, but everyone, it's small.
Yeah.
It's tiny. It could maybe fit a small roller bag. It literally is shallow, and it's small. And I curled up in every possible way. I'll get a picture up here on screen when the guys start talking again. I curled up in every way I possibly could. Then I had my husband try to put me in a trash bag as a full-bodied person. Remember, I'm not in rigor mortis, and he couldn't get me in that trash bag, the most gigantic trash bag. I got it, and it still wouldn't fit me, even curled up. You got to dismember the body as a point of practicality to hide the body. People think that when bodies are dismembered, and I'd love you guys to weigh in, that it's some sort of heinous, horrible act. Typically, it's to either hide the body or it's to confuse law enforcement. In other words, you've got a leg over here and an arm over here. It's difficult sometimes, although DNA now is much better, but to piece together the situation. In this case, I think it was they needed to get it, or somebody needed to get it in a trash bag, because so it wouldn't literally bleed bodily fluids all over and leak out of the frunk, and put it in and there was no way for her body to fit in that trunk other than to be dismembered. I did a video. I posted it on Twitter. I can't get it to come up here because it's too big, but it's just an impossibility. So I'm very much convinced now that first reporting was absolutely spot on, and she was dismembered.
I will say this. I just looked it up. The Model X frunk is 2.4 cubic feet larger than the Model Y. So it is bigger. Take that for what it is. The Model Y is about 4.1 cubic feet, and the Model X is 6.5 cubic feet. Still not a large space, but it is a little bit bigger.
Yeah, I said it was a little bit bigger, but
yeah.
I mean, remember, that's 2 cubic feet. That's just, I don't know, because it showed the depth in that, because that was the biggest problem, was the depth.
Yeah. Now, have they done a toxicology report on her?
We haven't seen it.
Yeah.
Could they be waiting on that?
Oh yeah, I think they're waiting on that as well, because this could also be something as simple and routine as a overdose. Yeah. We don't know that she used, I'm just saying this, and I said this last week, she could have overdosed, and then he just covered it up in a panic. How often have you seen something like that, Philip?
Oh, that's actually quite common, where you have a bunch of druggies hanging out and one of them ODs, they panic, and what do? They dump the body, and they're caught on video doing it. So the defense is they didn't do the killing, but you're almost like an accessory after the fact. And they're tough cases. Truthfully, they are, and juries have a hard time embracing them. So a lot of it hinges on the timeline. When was the death? When was the dump? And what evidence do they have? What witness type testimony do they have to show that a homicide occurred? And usually what kind of buttresses the defense that it was basically an accidental death from an overdose is the toxic levels of the illicit drug that's in the body. They can tell that a drug has not been introduced at a therapeutic level. And if it's at a toxic or lethal level, that certainly is evidence of causation. And that could be the defense. And we'll have to wait and see what they've got in the coroner's office. But typically what they do as part of the standard drug screen, the standard toxicology screen, is 100 standard drugs, some of which are street drugs like cocaine, meth, fentanyl, and the remainder are some pretty common prescription and even non-prescription items. So unless and until you are looking for a specific type atom or molecule or drug, they don't automatically look for it. So hopefully they will save a specimen so that if and when they ever charge David, the defense can do its own independent testing on the remainder of the sample to show, no, there were other sort of toxins in her body that did her in, completely unrelated to David. And again, it remains to be seen what comes up on the tox screen. But for now, it doesn't look like it's anything nefarious that's going to come up in a tox screen, for now anyway.
Dan, any investigation you've done as to, I mean, we know they partied, we know about the house, we know about the witnesses talking about that they partied, that she had a fake ID. Have you heard anything beyond that?
No, I mean, there's some music lyrics, as I mentioned before, about the usage of narcotics, but mainly marijuana. It's not even
Yeah.
narcotic. And so, you know, if they're doing that, maybe they're doing other things and experimenting with other things. And I guess maybe it's possible that, if she did OD on something and, given her age, somebody could have panicked and hit her somewhere in the car, obviously. And this is the outcome. I think that would make probably maybe a little bit of sense as to why they haven't made any charges, as far as like looking at him. I'm assuming you're going to be able to get warrants for his phone, and I'm hoping that you're going to be able to get some sort of communication, whether it's between him and somebody purchasing or selling of drugs, what kind of drugs that they're doing and using. If there's messages between her and him that are referencing the use of drugs, and perhaps maybe even some high potent stuff like cocaine, fentanyl, etc. And so I think that's where that investigation, it shouldn't be very hard to figure out. I mean, I'm assuming did they ever find her phone? Do they know where her phone is at?
I don't know, but no matter what, they're going to be able to use his phone to find her number and get the information that would be on the cloud. So I don't think the digital information is the problem. I think what could be the problem is either whoever put her in that trunk was covered up, like a Brian Koberger covered up, and so that the camera caught them, but they can't be identified, or they cut off the camera system, which is, like I said, you just click one button and slide it over. And then the other thing to consider is, and this could be, if they killed her or whoever killed her in another place and later put her remains in the trunk.
Exactly.
That, if that is the case, and we have to consider that. So if it wasn't kill, put remains there, if there was an interim place, then she could possibly be put in that trunk and fit if she was already badly decomposed. I mean, that could happen. I would find that unusual, but it could happen. Thoughts about that?
I think that that would make a little bit of sense to a certain extent because of where they put her at. They put her in the front, not in the back, not in the trunk. And so if you put her in the front, maybe that's because she smells already. You get what I'm saying? And the way the Tesla is, it's I believe it's an open vehicle. And so that's a possibility there, that maybe she had decomposed a little bit already before they put her in the trunk. There was a pretty big dent in the back also. Mm-hmm. I wonder if that was, obviously because of something that was occurring with Celeste and out of panic and getting out of somewhere fairly quickly.
But the trunk, and I haven't seen the X. I only know the Y. Mm-hmm. But you can see back there in the trunk side, but not the front side.
Right, but I mean, you have her in a bag and stuff, so like you can still disclose that you can hide the body, but putting it in the front would perhaps, if you're traveling a good amount of distance with the body, that might be why you put it in the front, a smaller area, versus just the trunk where it's easier to get in and out of.
Just the odor, you're saying?
Yeah, I think the odor would make a difference, and I think also accessibility, maybe perhaps. I think it's easier to put somebody in a trunk quicker and close the trunk versus the front part. You got to put her in and then move body pieces around so that the trunk closes correctly.
What do you think, Philip?
I think that her somatic fat-free mass was so underweight because of decomp and possibly drainage and slippage of the body that it would have fit. I mean, if I recall correctly, what did her corpse weigh when they took it out, and brought it to the coroner? Wasn't it like 55 pounds or something like that?
It was 70, Philip, but
70. Okay.
That would have been after sitting in that trunk in a plastic bag. We all know what humidity does to the decomposition process. It's going to accelerate it so much more. And I mean, the heat. Oh my gosh.
Well, I would like to know what the gross weight was of everything collected, including the bags and any surrounding fluids, as opposed to just the fat-free mass of her standalone remains, because that will tell you a lot about how they were able to get her body into the frunk. That's number one. And number two, I think it'll also tell you how long the body was outside the frunk before it got dumped in there. So there's all kinds of things you can find out. And again, when you line up that timeline, it'll be sort of put in juxtaposition to his alibi. And if the alibi does not match on a timeline with the forensic entomology report, you know, the bug doctor, the insect doctor, how and when she lost all the fat-free mass, then this is going to paint a picture, if you will, or stitch sort of an embroidery, if you will, of murder. And there's no other way to explain it. So a lot of it still remains to be seen, and we won't know until we get the tox screen back, until we get the HCG report back, and certainly the fat-free mass, and if there is a forensic entomology opinion.
So, guys, I want to leave it with this. Well, first of all, I'm going to ask if either of you have anything that I left out in terms of the evidence or in terms of something that just you think we should talk about. Dan, I'll ask you first.
Well, the first thing that I'm curious about, and I'd like to get your opinion, Philip, is does it matter if it comes out, we find out that the body wasn't dismembered, it just was badly decomposed, that it came apart? Let's just say that ends up being the case, because I think it's been said that it was dismembered. I've read several articles, though, that kind of are up in the air about it, if it was in fact dismemberment. I think that when they asked the coroner in a press conference, they weren't very clear about the answer to that question. But does it matter if there's the dismemberment aspect of it? Does it change anything about anything of the case?
I think the only thing that it really shows is an intent to kill. Obviously, when you're dismembering a body, you are deliberately trying to end a life. You don't want any signs of life. You don't want anybody who could come back and try to accuse you of anything. Now, on the other hand, if you put an intact body in a hefty bag, sort of a really, not necessarily industrial strength, but a heavy duty, heavy gauge bag, over time, because of the elements, temperature, and just natural decomposition, there is going to be ordinary slippage and wasting away. But you're not going to see evidence of an edged weapon having caused the slippage, caused the severance of the limbs away from the body trunk. There would have to be something to show that that occurred. But if all you really had was just sort of a natural slipping away as part of the decomposition process, then it doesn't really prove much. You still definitely have a homicide, because who in their right mind puts an intact body in a hefty bag and stuffs it in a trunk? I mean, that standing alone shows that there is some type of a homicide afoot. And again, it remains to be seen what else, if anything, they have. But for now, it sounds like there's really not enough evidence to prove that there was a murder. Yes, there is a homicide, death at the hands of another, but does it rise to the level of a murder where you could say it was done with intent? And unless and until you had that, you just can't bring the guy in. I think at most what they might have right now is evidence of an underage relationship. And absent maybe photos or video on his phone of her disrobed and them being intimate, and all you have is just his statements to other people or her statements to other people that they were intimate, it's not enough to charge him. It's just not enough.
But that underage relationship can be used against them if they charge him for motive purposes, correct?
Well, sure, of course. Yeah, I mean, you could listen. The possibility for motive is unlimited. I mean, seriously, it's just unending. You could come up with millions of reasons why you want to end a life, which is why motive is not an element of murder. But a jury certainly can put its common sense hat on and say, look, Maybe this girl was getting a little too close. She wanted more from the relationship. She wanted a commitment. Otherwise, she was going to blow the whistle on everything, tell her parents, tell the family, go to his family. And the last thing he needed when he's really sort of at the dawning days, or maybe even the pinnacle of his career, is for an underage girl to come forward with these types of exploits that would destroy his career, not to mention his criminal interests. I mean, the man could go to prison for life for this stuff. But yes, of course, it can be used as motive. Absolutely, it can. That's why people, for example, set a house on fire. You leave your victim in there because you can't prove anything. You can't prove that there was drugs involved. You can't prove that maybe there was a pregnancy involved. Nothing whatsoever. You can't even get your offender's DNA, their body fluids, their fingerprints, because everything is destroyed. So yes, that can be a motive for like arson murder. And in a case like this, dismembering the body or being with somebody who's underage certainly could be a motive to want to kill that person. Yes.
I think for me, just the biggest red flag here, just the first impression I had was, why didn't he miss her? Why didn't he miss the car? Why wasn't anything said? It just makes no sense to me, his actions. And then I want to say the strongest thing I think we have in terms of facts right now is there was a probable cause affidavit, meaning there was probable cause to prove that there was indicia of the crime, because that's what they were looking for. Blood, I believe, in the pipes, and any other evidence of the crime. I have pictures. I didn't put one up of them walking out with bags of evidence. So they obviously had probable cause, which I think is the strongest thing we know right now that links him possibly to this. Dan, what are your last words and opinion on the evidence and on what you think?
I think sooner than later, we're going to start to get a few more answers in this case. I think that there's a lot of there's a big digital footprint here, and I think that I think there's some finalizations that are going to be having to happen before something happens. But I think that because of that digital footprint, we should probably expect something, some sort of movement in this case relatively soon, in my opinion. I would assume probably in the next couple of weeks. I mean, if you look at, like, for instance, Brian Koberger, they got his name December 19th. They arrested him by December 30th or 31st. And so, about 10, 11 days, and about 3 or 4 of those days, we're trying to locate the guy. So they utilized his digital footprint, which wasn't that in depth. Now, yes, they had DNA on a knife sheath, but you also have a dead body in his car near his house. So I do think that there's something there. And so I would assume that based off of that and the digital footprint, I would assume that there's going to be some sort of movement on it. I'm a little bit surprised we haven't heard more, but if there are some things that are needing to be finalized, whether they're toxicology reports, forensic stuff, that could be the main reason. I mean, this guy is a wealthy dude. He's got quite a bit of money, so he's probably got a pretty high-priced lawyer. He's in the music industry. I'm sure his manager and his record label probably have, assisted him with that prior to this, having representation and things of that nature. And so I think that also probably plays a role. When you have somebody who's very wealthy with the capabilities of having a very good lawyer, you want to make sure your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted before you go down that road and have a high-priced lawyer embarrass you. You know what I mean?
Yep, totally agree. Philip, how about you? Last thoughts, anything we missed?
Well, I think if I were David, first of all, I would keep my mouth shut and I would absolutely lawyer up. And by the way, just so the public knows, anytime you think you're under investigation in LA County, you don't have to go out and hire a private attorney. You can go to your local public defender's office, and they are there to represent you, even though they haven't been officially appointed and even though you have not been charged yet in court. If you feel you are a grand jury investigation or you are being investigated by the police, go to the public defenders, and they have a staff of attorneys waiting for these calls, and they will gladly guide you and represent you and tell you what you should and should not do. And frankly, I'm not sure that this kid is as wealthy as everybody thinks. He's not the, the John Legends and the Luther Vandrosses of our R&B world yet. In fact, I'm not going to lie to you, I'd never even heard of the kid. When the story broke, I said, David who? I thought they forgot to announce the last name. I grew up in an era with, I don't know, Petula Clark, Burl Ives, and Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. So I don't know David from Apple Butter, frankly, but be it as it may, he just needs to keep quiet, not talk, and just keep doing what he does best, and that is make music.
Well, I will say he makes millions and millions of dollars in online.
Okay.
By the way, his views have gone through the roof since all of this, which what does that say about our society, I suppose, but he's innocent. Okay, I want to ask you about two lawyers before I let you go. Blair Burke, I know who Gloria Allred is. These are two individuals that our chat is saying possibly are going to represent him. Blair Burke, I know who Gloria Allred, she's a hot wire. What do you think of these? Have you ever heard of Blair Burke, Philip?
I do not know the name. Of course, I know the name Gloria Allred.
Yes.
But if I am not mistaken, and I don't want to misquote Miss Allred, she typically represents the victims and the victims of kin. So she does not do criminal defense, and she's certainly not a prosecutor. So I have a feeling that she is maybe what's called Marcy's counsel, which is counsel for the victims or the victims' next of kin.
Yeah, that would be my guess too when I read this in chat. But I don't know. Somebody seems convinced it's this Blair Burke, so I'm going to have to look him up. But obviously, this kid's smart enough to listen because we haven't heard a peep out of him. He's disengaged from social media. He's canceled all his concerts. He's out. So he's listening to his counsel. One last question. Sorry, I just thought about it. When the body was first found, but before we knew it was Celeste, his spokesman came out, and this is in a report, came out and said, listen, my client is fully cooperating in this deal and trying to help law enforcement, essentially, paraphrasing. Mm-hmm. What do you make of that? Do you think he lawyered up then or later, or that's inaccurate?
For me, I think that sounds like he has a lawyer, fully cooperating with authorities. I think is what the term was. That's lawyer speak. You know what I'm saying? That's not
police officer speak.
Right. So, or it's not, how the kids talk or anything like that. If he surrounds himself around the music industry, I'm not sure if the music industry as manager is going to say something like, well, maybe they might say he's fully cooperating, but the whole term fully cooperating with authorities, it sounds like a lawyer, sounds lawyer talk to me. And, if he is talking with police, I mean, I highly doubt he's doing that without representation.
Totally agree. You agree, Philip?
Yes. It's sort of a term of art. When you're fully cooperating, there's a difference between fully cooperating pre-charge or pre-filing and post-filing. Pre-filing just means that maybe you're returning calls and you promise to show up for any court dates, okay? But you certainly have no obligation to speak, and your refusal to speak to the cops pre-filing is inadmissible. It can't even come into evidence because you have a constitutional right not to talk to government actors, particularly if they're trying to speak to you about an unsolved crime. You're exercising a constitutional privilege. So you can fully cooperate by exercising a constitutional privilege by not, for example, absconding, fleeing the jurisdiction, promising to show up for court dates, not impeding the ability to issue a warrant, by not talking to witnesses and trying to discourage them or dissuade them from talking to the police. That is also a form of fully cooperating.
You guys, you have been amazing. I think the discussion was really good. I love all the different aspects you have. Dan, you're always so great at conducting the behind the scenes investigation, and Philip, your legal knowledge. particularly in California, because that's where you work both sides of the table. Thank you both so much. Chat, thank you, mods. Dan, Philip, I hope you come back again. You guys are really amazing. Thank you.
And if David calls you, tell him I'll represent him pro bono. He doesn't have to blow through all his fortune just to defend himself. Plenty of people will take this case pro bono. Right here, I'd be glad to.
I don't want you to. Goodbye, Philip. Adios.
Adios. Shalom.
See ya later.
Shalom, shalom.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Oh, everybody, I really, two of my favorites. I mean, you can't get anyone more intellectually solid in the law than Philip Dubé. And look, Dan and I just have some sort of vibe going too. I think we both want to be very careful when we speak and represent anything. He takes a deep dive in the same manner I do. I want to make it clear that neither of us, and certainly Dan made it clear and I made it clear, we're not pointing the fingers at the brother in any way other than I want to take a deep dive into that aspect, just from my experience, knowing what happens in these situations that the people you're closest to are sometimes called in to, let's say it this way, sometimes have knowledge. And then also that manager of his, I would really be wanting to talk all the ins and outs with him, and then lining up that schedule with what the epidemiologist, I'm so sorry, I know I said that wrong, the bug doctor and the forensic anthropologist, if there's one involved, but for sure there's going to be an epidemiologist, I think I said it right that time, a bug doctor, to look at determining a better idea of time of death. Remember, there was skin. Even though they were badly decomposed, there was skin, because that's how they were able to ID her, through the SHH ... I think there were 3 dots afterwards. So thank you all for being here. Kept you way over the hour, which is not my usual. I appreciate each and every one of you. If you like the show, please press like and subscribe. We would love to have you as a member of our true crime community. Until next time, may justice be served for Celeste.